but thanks so much for being here. My name's Abby. I am the undergraduate recruitment specialist for the Faculty of Engineering, and I'm excited to share some engineering student stories here tonight, all kind of centered around environment and infrastructure topics. So let's get started with a territorial acknowledgement. So the University of Waterloo would like to acknowledge that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the Neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We're situated on the Haldeman Tract, which is land granted to the Six Nations, and it includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Um, our active work towards reconciliation and community building takes place across our campuses, and it's in all kind of centralized within our Office of Indigenous Relations. So I recognize that we're all joining from a variety of different places for this webinar, maybe watching across Canada, across the world. So I encourage you to learn more about the territory that you occupy and what you can do as treaty people to reconcile these relationships. So throughout the webinar, feel free to submit any questions you might have using the Q&A feature. Closed captioning is also available by clicking on the CC button that is at the bottom of your screen, depending on what configuration you might have. Could also maybe see it at the top at the side. So we're going to be responding to questions through typed responses by staff and students, and as many as possible are also going to be answered out loud during our moderated Q&A portion, which will take place in the second half of the webinar. If you have any specific questions or any questions that we're not able to get to during the webinar, please email us at enginfo@uwaterloo.ca and we'll be happy to assist you there. All right, like I said, we're going to be sharing some engineering student stories. So we have 4 current engineering students here at Waterloo who are going to be sharing their stories tonight. So we have Rodena from Architectural Engineering, Lakmi from Civil Engineering, Rayella from Geological Engineering, and Cody from Environmental Engineering. So they're all going to be sharing their stories, a little bit about their programs and their experiences in them. So without further ado, let's get started with Rodena and Architectural Engineering.
Everyone, my name is Rodena and I'm from Architectural Engineering. I'm an almost 4th-year architectural engineering student. I'm currently in Denmark right now. It's 1 a.m., so please excuse the dreadful lighting. The Danes have this concept where they go to sleep very, very early, and then they wake up very, very early, so their lights are kind of regulating their sleep schedule. So sorry about that. So starting off, why architectural engineering and what is architectural engineering? So I kind of like to say that architecture and civil engineering, that is what architectural engineering is. It's the study of all things buildings, and students, they can specialize in building systems or building structures. And I was previously considering both architecture and civil engineering, and I actually applied to a bunch of programs across Canada, but Waterloo is the only program that has architectural engineering. Carleton has one that's a little similar, but Waterloo was the only one that really had what I was looking for, which was a very large focus on math, engineering, and just buildings in general. I didn't want to touch transportation or sewage or water. Just personally, I just found buildings very interesting. And from buildings, there's many industries, including structural, building systems, building science, architecture, and construction management. You can also pursue things that civil students pursue, environmental or geological, but we're a lot more focused on buildings. And so our courses reflect that. So with structural, you have courses such as finite element analysis, timber design, concrete design, steel design. Building systems, so the structure, you can think of it as a building, you can think as a human body. So structural systems, it's kind of like the bones of a building. Building systems, I would say it's more so the organs. So if it fails, the whole building will collapse. So things like fire safety engineering, service systems, like infrastructure in general, and building performance measurement labs are some key courses. Building science, I'd like to say it's a bit more like the skin of the building. So building enclosure systems, building science and technology, building energy analysis. So the nitty-gritty of the walls and what they're composed of. In architecture, it's the more artistic side, the more design-based side. So we have history of the built environment and all the studio courses that we have to take. So architectural engineering, you have to take a studio course every single semester. And with that, you're able to develop your skills on AutoCAD, Revit, Rhino, and rendering platforms such as Enscape. So in the corner there, there's a little bit of a tiny library that I built with my group. And this is a rendering of that tiny library. Just kind of delving into some of the pictures here before we move on. Next to that is a picture of me dead asleep after a very brutal exam. And the one after that is me playing chess on my iPad. There's a little bit of a game that we play in my program where we try to spot people doing things other than listening in class. And I've been caught a lot. Some other pictures, there's also a picture of my friends and I doing a field trip that we had at the university where they took us to a newly built timber structure. It was very interesting. And then on the right of that is just us going to Cambridge to see the Cambridge campus because architectural engineering students, they get to spend 2 semesters in the architecture Cambridge campus and learn a little bit more of architectural focused studies. And finally, the one at the bottom is just from my favorite co-op. So there I started off as an embodied carbon intern where I did a little bit more sustainability focused of a co-op. So I looked at how much carbon a building generates in terms of its structure. And then I moved on to structural systems for my second co-op there, which actually led me to specializing in structural systems and structural engineering in general. Okay, so my experiences in architectural engineering. I have been at the University of Waterloo, I think 4 years now. I started in 2022. And I would say that my favorite course was probably Calc 3 or differentials. I really enjoy the math-based aspect of engineering. So some of my top memories. So I've been backpacking Europe on exchange. And I'm currently in Denmark, but some countries that I've visited or that I am visiting are Denmark, Italy, Vienna, Finland, Sweden, Czech Republic, and Germany. And I'm actually going to Finland in 2 days for a week and a half. Today was my last day of classes, actually, so I'm very excited for that. And I don't have exams until January. It's a very strange system. But other top memories, I was an undergraduate research assistant on a Canadian Research Council of Canada project. I was recently named a Canadian Arab 30 under 30, so that was a very humbling experience and kind of shocking to hear about. I also spoke at the AE Iron Pin ceremony for the class of 29, and it made me feel very old because I heard that there was a class of 29 and there's about to be a class of 2031, and oh my goodness. I also ran a half marathon on a co-op, and I'm currently training for a full marathon. And finally, some of my top extracurriculars at the very top, you'll see some pictures from when I did orientation. And I was also an Iron Warriors writer and copy editor, so I mostly wrote about programs as buildings. I mostly really wrote about buildings, to be honest. And I was also a design team showcase director, a varsity student athlete on the squash team, where I was a women's team captain before I came on exchange. And we actually got a podium finish last semester. I was also an NSOC commissioner, photography and videography, and a Warrior Home design team cost estimation lead because I really like crunching the numbers. So if you have any questions about these extracurriculars or any of the memories that I've made, feel free to ask me about them. So my final thoughts is architectural engineering is very buildings focused. Some people go into architectural engineering that are very interested in bridges and they're still able to get through and they still really enjoy it, but it's just not as enjoyable as if they had, for example, gone to civil engineering. So I wouldn't discourage it, but I would just really start to think about what you would want to pursue in an engineering degree and what you actually really enjoy. A lot of the people in my program, they kind of just look at a building and they go, oh my gosh, that's a very hot building. And you develop that kind of mindset with like-minded people that you're surrounded by. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to pursue actually going into architectural engineering. Before that, I didn't really know what architectural engineering was. I didn't go to any of these webinars. I just kind of thought that I was interested in buildings and this program made the most sense to me. And it worked out. And I was told that you learn to love what you do pursue. because of the amount of people that you're surrounded with that are so passionate with it. So I would just research a little bit more about architectural engineering if that's something you're interested in. And if you're interested in specializing in building structures or building systems, um, you can go into all of these industries even without specializing. I wanted to specialize in structures because I wanted that on my diploma, but you don't have to. And again, it's okay if you're not 100% sure about everything. Everything will kind of fit into a perfect puzzle piece by the end of it all. And a bit of a tip, as upper years, I would really recommend to go on as many side quests as you humanly can in university because time really flies. And if you can say yes, if you can just grind a little bit more and finish that assignment that you need to do and go out with friends and just do something that's fun and enjoyable, I would really recommend. My program, we had a Secret Santa, I think 15 minutes after our last exam every single year, basically. And it was such a fun experience, people just going out to buy these gifts for someone that they had drawn, even though they were all stressing about this exam. They're like, yeah, I really need to pass or else I won't pass the course, but I'm going to go buy a gift for someone in the program and make sure that's a good one. And my final tip is just go on exchange. It is an unforgettable experience and it's going to be a little difficult planning it, but you really, really won't regret it. And it'll be something that you look forwards to and that you tell people about just very excitedly. Yeah, that's it for me.
So, hello guys. My name is Lakmi, and I'm in civil engineering right now, currently on my last year. So, let's talk about it. So, civil engineering, you can kind of think of it as like all the public infrastructure around you from sky to below ground. We got things for structural with sky-rise buildings to sewers and transits. It's just everything you can see really around you. Within the program, we do have about five categories-ish that you can specialize in. We have the structural side with buildings, bridges, industrial plants, and things like that. With transit, we got things like traffic systems, color light exchanges, networking, and so on. A bit of geotechnical with soil pressures and bearing, water for things like culverts, dams, sewer systems, and anything with construction management. Within the program itself, you can go into a variety of different what's called skills and projects. So for example, we go and work with AutoCAD and Civil 3D a lot in first year, as along with other labs like soils and surveying, just to get a really good idea of what the program is about and what you can get into for future co-ops. For civil engineering itself, when I was first deciding, I was debating a bit between architectural and civil, as well as a little bit of urban planning. When I was in high school, I wasn't really sure of which kind of stream I wanted to do. I was looking into public infrastructure itself, but I was on the fence between like structural and transit. So that's one of the reasons why like civil engineering is so broad that you can really specialize in. And then my experience in civil engineering, we do have a bunch of great courses and concepts that we can go through. For example, in first year, we do have a Civi 100s course, which is basically about all the fundamentals of civil engineering. You'll get to do some surveying, working on technical reports, and these can really help fill up your resume for future co-ops as well. Another course we recently had was our Civi 495, which is a timber course. I'm more inclined to the structural side now, so this was a great opportunity to work on a final project, work with some AutoCAD modeling, and learn about the design codes, etc. And one other course that I really enjoyed was our Civi 230 sustainability course. So we are able to touch a little bit on sustainability, and from this course, I actually found that I really like the sustainability aspect of the program. And so I'm actually pursuing a diploma in sustainability alongside this course with my electives. Within the program, we do have a bunch of interesting projects that we can work on. We do have design days, I believe, in first or second year, where you're working with teams to design bridges or network paths. We have concrete testing in labs, buoyancy projects with cardboard and concrete cylinders, and traffic modeling in general. So if you are interested in any of the broad aspects, there's definitely plenty of courses where you're able to see. From my co-op experiences as well, because I wasn't so sure of what I wanted to do within civil engineering, I got a variety of different activities. So, for example, my first one was working with construction coordination on the QEW highway, which was a great experience for my first one, especially getting the fundamentals. I worked with sewer systems and culverts, so anything water-based, and etc. Worked with Metrolinx for some of the trains and railway designing, structural calculations for high-rise buildings, especially the ones in downtown Toronto near like Pinnacle, and also industrial projects for some of the mines in the US. So really, there's a bunch of different co-op opportunities that you can pursue with civil. It's just figuring out what you're passionate and interested in. And to conclude with some of my favorite clubs, teams, and extracurriculars, I've been part of like the Women in Engineering and Warrior Home as well for the estimating in a previous term. And more recently, I did decide to go out of my comfort zone and join the Eng Play, which is a student-run play where it was a great experience to kind of work with other students outside of the program too. And so I guess my final thoughts and takeaways, this course is a really, I guess, focus on calculations, labs, and analysis. And it's a really great opportunity to go into it if you aren't too sure if you want to go into a specific side. So unlike architectural engineering, it's definitely a lot more broad, where you have structural, transportation, water, and geotechnical. So if you aren't too sure right now as a high school student, they definitely give lots of courses on a more broad aspects of these items, which can be pretty helpful. And if you are interested, you can specialize within third year, but it's not a mandatory aspect of it. My advice right now as students, definitely reach out to upper year students, even if they're not within the Waterloo program, but any other university as well. Just see what they're interested in, get more in depth about their courses and the programs, etc. And just really research what you're passionate and interested in for your future. And thank you.
Sweet. The coolest engineering, guys. Yeah, so my name's Rayella. I'm a second year in geological engineering, kind of like the lesser known or lesser pursued, but in my opinion, one of the coolest. So the way that I'd like to describe geological engineering is that it's kind of like a mix between civil engineering and earth sciences. So we'll take a lot of the same courses as like civil engineering. So like we'll take a bunch of solid mechanics, we take geotech as well as hydrology and open channel flow as well as calculus. Kind of like what you should expect in first year is like all the classes that we take in first year is the same as kind of civil engineers and the environmental engineers. Yeah, and geological engineering, it kind of looks at everything from the surface and below. So that means that we can also work on like construction sites, which is what I did for kind of like my first co-op. I was on kind of like a road widening site for a contracting company. So that's kind of like on the civil side of things. And then yeah, what else can I talk about? We do a lot of like earth courses as well. So we're not just like mixed in with geological engineers. We also get to talk a lot to kind of like people that are in the earth faculty and like the environment faculty as well. Some of the sample courses that you can kind of expect, which is more like specializing in second year, is structural geology and mineralogy, as well as field courses. Something that I really love about my program is that I think that we have like the most field trips compared to like other engineering faculties. So as soon as your first year, your first week of your first year, you'll go up to Elora Gorge, which is kind of like shown in the bottom right photo. That's a picture of Elora Gorge. This year we also went to Bancroft to look at some rock outcrops, which is like the long photo that you see at the bottom. We also went to London to look at the oil, gas, and salt resources library, which is kind of interesting. And yeah, some kind of some industries that you can expect to go to with a geological engineering degree is mining. So I really like mining, so that's kind of like what I'm trying to pursue. You can also go into oil and gas, geothermal energy, which is kind of like what drew me to the program in the first place. I know some people that are graduating next year that are going into consulting, mineral exploration, and earthworks engineering. Some kind of like programs and skills that you might need in this program is AutoCAD. So that's kind of like a 3D modeling software that you'll use in your first year, first semester. You'll kind of get exposure to that. It's also like heavily like it's also good to know because civil engineers use it a lot as well. Deswick is kind of like the same thing as AutoCAD, but it's more geared towards mining. Another kind of like mining 3D software that you can expect to use is Vulkan. Well, I did a lot of surveying in my kind of co-ops, which I honestly really enjoyed, and field fitting. Sweet. My experiences in geological engineering. Oh, sorry, I didn't talk about why I chose geological engineering. So, kind of like my thought process when I was applying to universities is I had three things in mind. I wanted to go into engineering, I wanted to go into three schools, Waterloo being one of them, and I didn't want to spend kind of like my entire degree or my future kind of like stuck in an office job. So, I feel like reading the descriptions of what Waterloo offered, geological engineering kind of best fit that. My favorite courses are mineralogy and structural geology. Mineralogy, you look at kind of like the structure of minerals. And what's kind of my favorite thing about these courses, like specifically the earth courses, is that they're heavily lab based, or you spend a lot of time in the lab, kind of like looking at rocks, you kind of identifying in them, and just like they're just so pretty. Some interesting projects that kind of like geological engineers will do. So I know some panelists earlier mentioned design days. So kind of like in the top middle photo is the design day that we just completed. We'll take that with the civil engineers and it's kind of like bridge building with foam. And then the one to the top right is another design day that we kind of take with the environmental engineers and you're building kind of like an earthworks embankment. Yeah. Some other interesting kind of like projects that we've done is outcrop mapping, which is like that long photo from the previous slide, and overnight field courses, which is like my favorite thing. That comes in mineralogy, where I get again like you spend an overnight trip in Bancroft with your other classmates. You get to know your professors a little well. There's also another field course coming up for after 3B, where you spend 2 weeks out in someplace like Sudbury, I think, kind of just like looking at rocks and spending time with your classmates and your professors, which I'm really looking forward to. Some co-op experiences. I've really enjoyed my co-op experiences so far. So my very first co-op experience was a project coordinator in contracting, kind of like what I mentioned earlier. I was on a construction site and I was just like making sure, like keeping all their documentation up to date, kind of like talking to the workers of like what we need to do and the schedule of it. My favorite co-op experience so far has been the field technician co-op where I worked at a diamond mine in the Northwest Territories, and kind of the vibe with that is that it was like a fly in, fly out job. So I'd work for 2 weeks straight and then I'd have 2 weeks off again. And it was just, I feel like it's a lifestyle that's not exposed to everyone. So I really love that as well. Um, yeah, and then my most recent co-op was as a geotechnical intern, which is at the same diamond mine, except it was like in a kind of different department. So I went underground a lot, which I really enjoyed. And something my upcoming co-op term is going to be a geology intern out in Labrador City. Some kind of like extracurriculars that I'm involved in or things that I'm looking forward to are industry nights that are hosted by our program coordinator. It's kind of like she'll bring they'll bring in like people that have graduated already from Waterloo Engineering in our programs and they'll explain like what kind of like what they do. They'll also bring in companies that hire co-ops and like it's just a great way to kind of like talk to recruiters and start networking. Something that I've really enjoyed is design teams and concrete canoe. I just feel like it's a really great way to build experience in first year and kind of like get a technical background when you start applying for co-ops. And two other things that I'm really looking forward to is that I have a field course in Vietnam that was kind of yeah, I have an upcoming field course in Vietnam, which I'm really looking forward to, and exchange term, which I've applied to, and that will come at my 4A term or 3B term. Sweet. So, final thoughts. I think geological engineering, it's like a very field-oriented program with opportunities to work inside as well. So during my co-op terms, I was able to go out in the field a lot. But kind of like if it was like really snowy that day or it was just really cold, I could also opt to like work inside if I wanted to as well. I think we have some of like from what I've heard of my other like kind of classmates is that we have some of the coolest like career opportunities and that are very high in demand actually. So I'm not sure if you heard, but the Ontario government is kind of like looking to start mining in the Ring of Fire, which is basically like it's a spot in North Ontario that's very rich in critical minerals, and they're looking to start mining that. And kind of like the job opportunities that will come out of that is kind of geared towards geological engineers and towards the mining community as well. So that's kind of something that you can look forward to. The specializations that we have are in geology, hydrogeology, soil, rock, and structures. So if like any of those kind of interest you, this might be the program for you. My advice to kind of like high schoolers that are looking to apply this for next year actually is that I feel like you'll succeed wherever you put your effort and passion. Like if you have a passion for something and if you put like your heart into it and you try and like yeah, if you just put your heart into it, I think you'll do well in whatever you do. Try looking for co-ops outside the school job board just because I feel like you're competing against other people in your program that kind of like have the same resume as you in your first year. And don't apply to schools last minute.
Oh, hi. So yeah, I'm the environmental engineering representative here. My name is Cody. I am currently in my 4A term for environmental engineering. So yeah, I'll get into this. Yeah, so one of the things that I like to say when I'm describing Enviro is that it teaches you to sort of appreciate appreciate things that people take for granted, basically. Something like turning on your tap and getting water, to like walking on a sidewalk and during like a rainstorm and not immediately walking in a puddle, stuff like that. That I think we do a lot of like large scale stuff that combines both math, chemistry, physics, and biology. So yeah, we apply a lot of very broad things to a lot of stuff that interacts like everyone needs to sort of like, live out their daily lives. As far as like types of jobs do that we can do, we have both private and public sector jobs for pretty much anything you can think of that like interacts with the environment. Personally, I've done a lot of work in water, but I've also done work for natural gas. I've done work for mining, that kind of thing. As far as like why I chose this program, when I was in high school, I really wanted my actions to have impact. I wanted to make it so that way when I graduated, I wanted to be able to do things that would, I would be able to have a large scale impact and like be able to help a lot of people. I loved math, I loved chemistry, and specifically, my high school had a shop class. So I got to do a lot of drafting work when I was in high school, and I loved it. The irony is that I kind of thought like I loved it so much, and I was like, well, but I'm probably going to go into something that like won't need it. So too bad I won't get to do this again. And then I ended up doing a bit of drafting in my first year. And then I did it on co-op, and now I've even drafted like entire like 2.5 kilometers of pipelines. So I've been able to do a lot of stuff with that. Another thing is I also heard a lot of good things about Waterloo's co-op program. I knew that I wanted to have some work experience before I graduated. Another cool thing about our co-op program is that you can get up to a year's worth of experience for your PEng, which is probably like the most important qualification you can have, at least if you're in this kind of engineering. So it does help a lot. And that goes the same for like civil arc and geo as well. As far as sample courses go, if you've sort of like, if you paid attention to like the civil or the geo sort of courses, we take pretty similar courses to them. It's just that we have a lot more sort of focus on water, as well as some other things like air and chemistry. So I'd say if you want to apply chemistry if you want to apply chemistry to your sort of engineering studies, or if you want to really focus on water, environmental engineering is like the main program for that. So we got some courses like lots of modeling. That's where we use things like coding and like software to sort of predict, how the environment is going to act. I'll get into that a bit more later when I talk about some of my favorite courses. Then we also do things like field sampling. So for example, one of those pictures over there it's got like red ink. We actually had to alert the conservation authorities when we did this. So basically put red dye into the river, and then that kind of tracks it. It's a stand-in for how things like pollution would move in the water, except we could actually see it. So basically, every time you do this, you put some red dye in the water. You notify all the local authorities to make sure that they know that it's not a dead body or anything, and that's just harmless red dye. And then you kind of like watch it, and you get to see a visual representation on how our actions can like affect the environment. We've also got some other lab work there on the side. I've got a photo on the bottom right that's from a hydrogeology course that I took, where we get to go up to North Campus and we get to actually like drill into the ground and we pull up a core and we get to see like the soil composition, stuff like that. And then the photo on the top right is of me in one of my chemistry labs, or well, chemistry, but it was also just sort of water quality, where we have basically a giant tube full of dirty water. And they picked me, the shortest person in the group, to go to the very top of it. And I'm right over there trying not to spray my classmates with clay water. So there's just some fun stuff for that. We get a lot of like hands-on labs, and I think like that's like one of the like main draws to this program, I think. Next one. Yeah, so I think some of my favorite courses, I kind of like the stuff that sort of goes more along modeling. Although I do like water a lot, but I also like air quality. So I think some of my favorite courses that I took have been like air quality, fluid mechanics, contaminant transport, basically just courses that tell you about how things move. So things like air quality. If you've ever talked to me at an open house before, I'll say things like, this program teaches you to see things where like I have a course where I get to learn how pollution moves through the atmosphere. So, if, for example, in that air quality course, if you take that, you can actually look at a factory and you can look at the smokestack and see all the smoke coming up. And that can kind of actually give you an idea of how fast the wind is moving at that point, as well as like how hot the air is. And I just think things like that were like, yeah, like I learn in university and maybe it'll come in handy in my career, but I can also I can apply this learning pretty much everywhere. And like I can look around at my neighborhood and things that I never would have thought about before. They make sense now. We got some other things like some of my projects that I've been able to do. Right now, I'm currently doing capstone since I'm in fourth year, which is the photo on the sort of left over there with the jug of green water. That's actually algae. Specifically, it's a species called Chlorella vulgaris. And currently, my capstone is on doing sort of like carbon capture. So we're trying to see if we can take indoor spaces where we can't really grow trees, we can't grow plants, and we can kind of make like build sort of like trees out of algae into the buildings. Not to replace trees, of course, but to sort of like increase the amount of carbon that we can take in from the atmosphere, and try and slow down climate change or like increase health benefits from lowering carbon concentrations in the local atmosphere, things like that. I've also got to do a lot of cool work on my co-ops. I wouldn't say really I do too many like side projects as far as engineering is concerned, but I do try to get quite a bit of interesting work during my co-ops. One of the coolest things that I've been able to do is called a dam breach analysis. So that's basically the photo on the top over there, where we have a dam that's about 7 meters tall and 2 kilometers wide. So there's a lot of water there. And if it were to break, so if we were to build it wrong, a lot of environmental damage could be done. In this case, no people would have been harmed, but like in other cases where dams are really close to sort of urban environments, the risk is a lot higher. So basically, we say, okay, here's this dam. It has 2 kilometers worth of water. It's basically a lake at that point, and we say hypothetically, let's explode the dam and see how bad the damage is. And I was doing that in second year, just on the side. Like I didn't have like enough responsibility to sign up on that, but it was like a cool thing to do, before I've even graduated. We also do things like field camp, which they started doing this like a couple terms ago, and I believe you'll actually get to do a few more field camps if you join the program now. Since I'm one of the older students, I get a few less opportunities, but you guys you're gonna have a much better program than what I went through. So we have field camp where we basically had 2 overnight field trips, and we got to sort of we took sort of lab analysis and like we did like lab analysis of like soil in like the local area. There's a picture of me that I don't think I included on this, but there's like me wearing waders. So it had just rained, but it wasn't like too wet to like be dangerous. So me and a bunch of other classmates put on these like waterproof pants and we go into the middle of a river and we try and take samples while not falling down. So really fun stuff for that. As far as my co-ops go, I've taken more of kind of like an indoor office work kind of route for my co-ops. But a lot of people get work at like field work, that kind of thing. But personally, I've done a lot of work for drafting. Most recently, I did flood mapping research for NRCan. So that's the photo on the bottom right over there, whereas that's actually a small subdivision in Kitchener. All of the water you see there, that is water ranging from 0 to 3 meters at depth as a result of a rainstorm. So part of my research was to see if we could use this free software that's not normally known for modeling cities, and we could sort of use these new features to try and see if we can make flood modeling more accessible. Yeah, and as far as like clubs, teams, and extracurriculars go, I've been doing engineering ambassador since my first co-op. I'm actually just like the head of my program, so if you ever actually read one of these like brochures, you'll see my face there. Um, but other than that, I haven't really done too much for like engineering extracurriculars. But there are actually a lot of things that you can do outside of the faculty. I'm currently one of the main execs for the Pokemon Club, so I run a lot of tournaments for people over there. And I've also played in the concert band for a bit because you'll notice, at least something that I've noticed, is that a lot of people in engineering at some point did something with the arts. So there's a lot of former band students in engineering. There's a lot of theater kids in engineering. There's a lot of like art students in engineering. Yeah, it's like even if you like go into something that's more STEM focused, there's still a lot of opportunities for you to still like engage in those hobbies that you might have had in high school. So yeah, got some more photos of me here. One of them is from our field camp that I said, where we got to go to a quarry in Paris, Ontario. So we got to like sift through rocks, that kind of thing. Um, and then there's a photo of me doing a hydrant test where basically they opened up a hydrant for about, I think, 15 psi of water. It was quite a bit, and it was a bit cold, and I had to hold a gauge to measure how fast the water was going at just above freezing. So that was was not the most fun, but I had a lot of it was an interesting experience. And apart from the cold, I did enjoy it quite a bit. But yeah, so in summary, I guess Enviro is basically we combine all the sciences as well as math. You don't have to do all just biology. You don't do just physics. Basically, it's as you progress through the degree and you kind of learn more about what Enviro does. You get to kind of pick what you want to apply. Um, so like for example, I think at this point, like I think I do more math than science because I do a lot of modeling, whereas I know some people do a lot of chemistry because they do biology, like that kind of, or like wastewater, like that kind of thing. As far as our specializations go, we have things like water resources, pollution, modeling, energy, and sustainable cities, which basically they're like water, energy, pollution, sort of like modeling, and I guess planning would be how I would describe all of them. I'm personally taking the water resources one, and I wanted to take sustainable cities, but again, because I'm one of those older students, I didn't have exactly as many electives as some of the newer students got. But you'll get a lot earlier electives than for what you may have heard if you had talked to like an older student like a couple years ago. As far as my advice goes, I'd say look at the upper year courses. I was told in first year by one of my professors that like you should try and look at the courses that you'll be taking in the future, and if they excite you, then you're on the right track. If they don't, maybe it's not your thing. Maybe you just need to do more research. But if you see something and it says like design of urban water systems or something like that, and you think that's like even just like a little bit interesting in high school, then like look a bit more into that because maybe that might be something that you want to do when you sort of finish university. And as far as like things you're doing in high school, I know I thought the things I was doing in high school didn't really matter too much, but now like when I do modeling. If you're in high school, right, like y equals mx plus b. I like to always say like the m, like that is the core of environmental engineering. We really go in depth with that kind of thing, and like that everything that we model looks like something like a bit more complicated than what you do in high school, but ultimately it all basically boils down to just a slightly more complicated version of y equals mx plus b. And I think that was neat, like I didn't give that equation any thought when I was in high school. But now like I just took like a 500 level course for that. So yeah, just look at things that you enjoy in high school and just see if you can apply that to sort of things that you want to do in university.
All right, thank you so much to all those panelists for those great insights. Before we move into our Q&A period, I just want to highlight a few additional resources that we have that you can continue to explore after this webinar. So we have something called Engineering Shadow Days, where you can come to campus and shadow a current student through kind of a day in their classes and labs and see what a day in the life looks like. So that's a really great opportunity if you are going to be near the Waterloo campus at some point. So definitely check that out. Do keep in mind it only runs when classes are running, and we're approaching the end of our fall term at the moment, so you might be waiting for the new year at this point, but definitely worthwhile checking out for the future. Admissions questions, or really any questions that you have and you're not sure who to direct them to, enginefo@waterloo.ca goes to my team, and we're happy to answer or redirect as appropriate through that inbox. And then chatting with our current students, our student ambassadors, so including all of the students that are on this call, if you want to continue to ask them questions or ask other students questions in other programs, or just find students who have similar interests as you, that is a really great resource. If you go to that link or search Ask a Warrior, University of Waterloo, you can chat with current students and get their thoughts on their program. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll invite the panelists to turn their cameras on as we enter our Q&A period. And if you do have any questions that you'd like our panelists to answer, please put them in the Q&A at this time. But for now, I think I'd like to get started with misconceptions about your program. So what do you think is kind of a misconception or a myth about your program that you would want to address, that you commonly hear, I guess, from like prospective students, or maybe something that you even thought before coming in? Um, I'll kind of leave that open-ended to whoever would like to get started with that question.
Can I start? I think there's this misconception that architectural engineering students are so good at drawing. A lot of architectural engineering students are very, very bad at drawing. It's very, very bad. We are, although there is a reputation though that architectural engineering students, they're very fashionable. I would like to say that I think my class is the most fashionable 27s. Personally, into class, like supermodel, like fits that are just insane levels of creativity. So I think architectural engineering students, they're very creative, but a lot of architectural students don't really know how to draw. And I think it scares a lot of people. Architectural engineering has the word architecture in it, so you have to know how to draw and you have to be very artsy. That is definitely not the case. So I wouldn't be scared of architectural engineering if you're not a good drawer.
Yeah, great point. I know we had a question earlier about like, do I need a portfolio? And no, you do not need a portfolio for architectural engineering. You do need one for our architecture program. But although architectural engineering is kind of that hybrid between architecture and civil engineering in terms of course content, closer to that math and science ends than it is the drawing that is involved in architecture. Who'd like to share next? Myth or misconception, Lakme?
I can go next. I think even when I was starting high school, when I was looking at civil engineering, I was like, oh, it's just buildings. There's nothing else. It's just a structural component. But once you get more into the program, you realize there's a lot more to realize. Like I didn't realize that all the culverts, the sewers, even the drainage that we have in Toronto, like I see some of the flooding there, and I'm like, oh, I know what the issue is. You really start to delve into like how the infrastructure is. And it's not just the buildings, it's just the whole infrastructure that we have.
Absolutely, yeah. And then that leads great into like what the difference between architectural and civil engineering is. It's really like is what is civil engineering is kind of going beyond the buildings. I mean, it includes the buildings, but there's so many other things too, right?
Right.
Okay, I feel like one of the misconceptions of like geological engineering is that like maybe it's the easiest or that we only just look at rocks. Just because I feel like it's lesser known. But I feel like geological engineering, we're taking a lot of like the same hard classes that civil eng are doing. So like, I don't know, I kind of struggled in like rock mechanics or like solid mechanics. We also take like all the calculus courses. So I know for Enviro, you only take up to Calc 2 and DEs, but for Geo, we take up to Calc 3 as well as DEs. And I'm not sure if you have any other math courses, to be honest. In terms of like the rock things, like Yes, I feel like I do like rocks, but I didn't like rocks going into it. I feel like it's just kind of like something that I've learned to love. But you can pursue stuff like just outside of rocks as well. Like I mentioned earlier, like you can go into consulting or construction for geological engineering or earthworks.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Cody, do you got a misconception for environmental?
One was actually just mentioned, actually. We actually do take Calc 3. It's under the name environmental modeling. A lot of people don't really realize that it is Calc 3. Honestly, I'm really happy that we got to take that instead of Calc 3 because basically we have David Brush, who is the current 100 professor. He's super good if you ever get to have him. And he teaches, well, he used to teach in bottling. I don't know if he teaches it anymore. But he teaches it in a way where all the calculus kind of gets applied. So instead of like the math being like strict math problems, they just turn into really like applied word problems. So for example, like I don't remember anything from Calc 1, but I can tell you exactly how you set up an equation to model the pollution in a river. And I thought that I hated math in first year, and then I took my second year calculus course for differential equations, remembered that I loved math. And then all of a sudden, I took the 500 level contaminant transport course, which is effectively Calc 5. So that's kind of my thing for that. But as far as like other conceptions go for the program, a lot of people think we engineer plants because they hear the environment and they think like, oh, like you're doing things like plants, you're like engineering trees. I think that's probably the least likely thing of all the things that Enviro does. I think plants are probably like the least similar to that. I say as if I don't have about 30 house plants in my room at the moment. A lot of people do like plants, we just don't engineer them. But yeah, we do mostly things like water, things like storm drainage. There is some stuff for energy, air quality, stuff like that. But I think I'd say the newer version of Enviro definitely leans a bit more towards that. The Enviro that I've taken, definitely a lot more water. But yeah, so I think like don't maybe don't expect too much for like, yeah, we're gonna save the world because I think that's a lot of people seem to get that idea when they talk about Enviro. Um, but if you want to like sort of get like a really broad thing for things like that, like yeah, there will be a bit more stuff for like energy or like air pollution in like the coming years. So if you were to start this year, you get more of it. But yeah, I think people tend to get like that kind of misconception with our program.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you. Um, all right. So I think I'd like to move into co-op because that's definitely a big part of all of the engineering programs. Co-op is a required part of all of your degrees, and you all kind of briefly mentioned your various co-op experiences, but maybe if you could expand a little bit on um, what co-op has been like for you and what maybe like your most memorable or favorite or however you want to qualify it, one co-op to kind of highlight above all the others. And maybe we can get started with Rayella.
Yeah, I'll start. I really enjoyed co-op. So my co-op experience as a first year, so geological engineering is only stream four, which means that you're looking for co-ops as soon as your like as soon as January. So your first co-op would be from January to April, and then you start school in September. So basically, as soon as your second week of school, you're kind of already applying to jobs, which I feel like is kind of like it is a difficult thing to do, but it's kind of the same for environmental engineering as well. Personally, I have beef with like the student student job board. No hate to it all at all. Like there are some really great opportunities there. I know a lot of people from my program, they were able to go to Whitehorse and they had their accommodations paid for in Whitehorse. There's also some pretty like decent paying jobs as well, but this kind of like comes into like more of your second or third co-op term. Kind of like that first co-op term, you're just trying to look to get some experience under your belt. You're the way the employers see you, you're kind of just like a fresh out of a high school. At least like that's kind of like what they viewed me as for my very first co-op. What else can I say? Yeah, I just recommend applying outside of the job boards just because you'll have like more kind of like there will be less competition. Like there have been some times where I've seen jobs on the co-op job board that are like 200 people applying for one position. I don't mean to scare you, but that's just kind of like the reality of things, especially because we're mixing in with the environment cohort as well and the civil cohort. So we're applying to like a bunch of like the same jobs as other people in those programs. So yeah, my favorite co-op experience, sorry, is the Yellowknife one in Diavik. Sorry, the Diavik Diamond Mine is what it was called. I really loved the lifestyle of it. It was like a fly in, fly out job. So again, like I got 2 weeks off every time off. After I got 2 weeks off, which like I feel like some people don't even get that in a year when they're working like full salary jobs. So that was just like a really unique experience for me. I know some people, what they did with that time is like they didn't go home. So I live in Toronto. So, and the fly out point was in Edmonton. Some people would just fly from Edmonton to like, I don't know, like Indonesia, during their 2 weeks off. And they just like never went home. I feel like it's also like you get to see a bunch of unique landscapes from the co-ops that I've seen. So like Arctic tundra, I've never seen before. Um, Unrelated, but like the field course coming up in Vietnam, like I've never been to Vietnam, so I feel like that's a really unique experience as well. And yeah, I just feel like co-op is just a really big part of kind of like Waterloo in general, and just like you're spending half your time in co-op as well. So it's like I just think it's a really great experience.
I really appreciate that, and it sounds like you could talk about that for like an entire webinar in and of itself. So that's really exciting. Lakme, did you want to share kind of your highlight co-op experience?
Oh yeah, I think my favorite one so far was the one I had last term. It was a structural design co-op where we were working with high-rise buildings. Basically, the high-rise building was a concrete structure, and we had about 30, 40 stories up in downtown Toronto. And I think what's really valuable is while you are designing and working through it, you do have site visits as well. So other than climbing about 30 stories in the freezing cold in Toronto, being able to see the work that you're doing and how we're implementing it really gives it a great opportunity to understand what you're going into as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Cody, did you want to share your highlight co-op experience?
Yeah, I think, okay, honestly, everyone really likes to highlight all like the engineering co-ops, but I think my favorite one was actually being a teaching assistant. One of the people, okay, when people go into Waterloo Engineering, especially like during tours and stuff, and we get to this office called the Leaf Office, and sometimes there are people there who talk about how like people struggle and their marks drop, and then that instills a lot of fear in people. And I feel like in general, just coming into Waterloo, you get a lot of fear. And I mean, I was definitely scared when I applied. I was scared when I got in. Yeah, even now, like I still have some stress. But I think what people don't talk about are the resources that are available to you. And one of those resources, if you're in first year, is a office of about 30 co-op students who are dedicated to teaching you your courses. And it's open for like 9 to 5, 5 days a week. So I was a teaching assistant for that. So I taught like the 100 course that the civils, enviros, and geos take. And genuinely, that was probably like one of my favorite co-ops. Just getting to help with labs, getting to know all the students. The amount of people that walked up to me and had seen me on these webinars and then said like, "Oh yeah, I remember hearing you talking about co-op, right?" And that was one of the things that like helped me sort of like decide to go into the program. Like, oh, you know me more just as a teaching assistant. Like that's kind of funny. But yeah, I think like I've done a lot of cool stuff in my co-ops, but I think like getting to sort of help out with like the university community. Also just because like there's always like this pressure to get like an in industry job. But there's a lot of job opportunities like at the university. And especially for something like Enviro, where it's really hard to get like that initial experience before you actually like sort of find a job in there. Like I had no experience going into this. It's like it's one of those things where like you can still get experience even through like the university, even if you've don't like you've never restored a river before or something like that. Um, so yeah, I think that's one of my highlights for co-op.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think even like, yeah, you can learn a lot about yourself and what you enjoy in the work that you do through co-ops, even if they're not those industry engineering jobs. Rodina, did you want to share your co-op highlight?
I did have a favorite co-op. It was my more technical one. I was working on tensile structures for actually one of the weeks I was working for tensile projects in Saudi Arabia for the NEOM kind of project that they're working on. But I would say that despite that being my favorite co-op, my biggest highlight was when I was in my second co-op where I was working at St. Michael's Hospital as an engineering project assistant. And I was working on infrastructure upgrades in the OR, which was the first time that they were ever doing OR upgrades. And it was me in scrubs at one point of the day and then taking off my scrubs, getting my construction boots, going to doctors being very angry about the construction. I actually had one of the students who was with me in the program. He's very scared of blood. He doesn't like blood at all. So he wasn't put on the infra projects. I was put on the infra projects because I almost went into medicine actually before deciding on engineering. So I was very good with blood. I was like, let me take this. And he went into the ORs with me because I really needed some help. And I kind of like goaded him into it. You're a guy, come on, you need to help me lift these heavy things. I'm a damsel in distress. And he helped me with it and he almost fainted and he still holds it over my head to this day. But it was just such a fun experience because it was so unexpected for an engineering co-op in construction to be in the ORs and you're looking at like the sterile core and I need to move these pieces of equipment into this OR or else this doctor is going to be angry with me. And it was just a very memorable experience that I don't think I would have experienced if not for co-op at Waterloo.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I feel like with co-op we talk about things that like can't be experienced in the classroom. That is totally something that like you are only going to go experience by being put in the workforce. So that's awesome. All right. So we're approaching the end of the webinar, so I'd love to just do a round of kind of final thoughts. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you are wanting to touch on, or final things that you would say to prospective students who are looking at your program? And Cody, do you think we can get started with you?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just what I said earlier, I guess. Environmental engineering is the kind of program where you get to sort of, you get to experience the world around you in a bit of like you get to see it in a different light. Everything from like I can't look at a rainstorm anymore and think of it anything else as like, oh, I know exactly where this water is going to go, or like I can't look at a parking lot anymore and think like, yeah, this was well designed. Like I know exactly there's a parking lot on campus where like the wheelchair spot has a storm drain on it and like puddles right next to it. um like I can't look at that and I'd be like I if I before this program I would have looked at that and not even given it a second thought. And now there's just certain things where I appreciate it more. Like I see all the design work that goes into it. I know how much like stuff goes into it just for like the construction, the planning, like everything. um and I think like, yeah, like I personally went into water, but it's such a broad program that even if you don't really go into something, like you still learn to appreciate it. I think they say like, no person in Enviro has the exact same resume, because everyone just kind of does something different. Even if you do water, like I do water utilities, but like other people do water for like wastewater. Some people do things like stormwater, or maybe like not like stormwater, but like hydrologic modeling kind of thing, where they get to physically see the storms. So yeah, I'd say it's a really broad program, and if you kind of want to learn more about the environment, sort of how we interact with it, I'd say it's a very good one.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. And I appreciate what you said about like, yeah, just realizing how much goes into everything that's around us. That's something that I've realized kind of working with engineers and all these different disciplines. Rayella, do you want to share your final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll go. I know we've passed it already, but kind of like still on that co-op thing. One of the people that were in my co-op, like her daily commute to work was through a helicopter, which like you don't get to experience that before. Like I don't know, I just feel like that's really cool. Yeah, so kind of like my overall thoughts about geological engineering. Again, like I wasn't super into rocks when I first came in, and I didn't think like, okay, it's just a rock, bro. Like it's not that deep. But yeah, like the same kind of thing as Cody was saying, like I don't know now, like when I drive by a highway and there's just like this big like rock face beside me, I'm like, oh my gosh, what kind of rock is that? What kind of like tests can I do? Like just like looking at things like in an entirely new light, from like an engineering perspective. And like yeah, again, like I wasn't into rocks, and it's just something you kind of like learn to appreciate as you go through this program. The more that you kind of like retain, the more you get an appreciation of like the detail and the work that things go on, of the things that go on around you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, thank you. Lakshmi, do you want to share your final thoughts?
Yeah, so like we mentioned earlier, it really is applying what you learn in school and seeing it in the world around you. Like even now, if I'm driving to work and I see the color lights taking too long to change, I'm like, there's a traffic engineer who's dealing with this and knows about the traffic flow and networks. So it's really about finding out what you're interested in. And as students, definitely check out Abby's recommendations for talking to future students to get a better idea of the program as well.
Really, thanks. And Rodana, last words from you.
I think it's basically the same sentiment that's been shared around. There's this quote, I think, that our profs like to use a lot from The Little Prince. It's something like, a rock ceases to be a rock pile once you imagine it as a cathedral. And I think that really encapsulates what architectural engineering is. The more you kind of study these buildings, the more you love them. I was entering Waterloo engineering liking buildings, and I feel like I'm loving them more and more. And even just traveling with my roommate to just see all these buildings that we'd studied for 4 years and just going like, what is this made of? Is just such an experience that you will not get anywhere but Waterloo Engineering. I've met other engineering students, and they are not to the level that Waterloo Engineering students are with how passionate they are about their program and everything that comes with it. And even if you're hesitant about whether or not you're going to like this program, you have to just dive into it. And surrounded by so many passionate people that love what they do, you're gonna find the bright sides, even when sometimes things might not be the best. You're not in the greatest spot with exams, for example, but it all works out in the end, and you'll find yourself in 4A, 4B, getting your engineering ring, and you'll just think back to all the good memories that you have in the program.
That's amazing. Thank you all so much for sharing your insights. I'll reiterate again, if you search up Ask a Warrior University of Waterloo, you can continue chatting with all of these amazing students and more. So keep the conversations going. Email us at enginfo@uwaterloo.ca with any other questions you might have, and we're happy to help. Choosing which program to apply to is a big decision, and so we're really happy to answer your questions and help you make the right one for you. So thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, and have a good night. Bye, everyone.